Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawalker, your host, and today we're going to be checking out this new album, Smithereens, from George Miller, aka Joji. There are a lot of things that this album has me reconsidering. During the lead up to this release, a few singles from this album have dropped. Glimpse of Us with its slow, heavy piano balladry and the standard Joji light falsetto. Yukon Interlude with its dancier, modern pop sound that borders on being a banger. But what I wasn't really expecting, what those singles were hinting at, was that this album was going to be two distinct parts. Part 1 of this album is tracks 1 through 5, and part 2 is everything that follows. And there are some differences between parts 1 and part 2, but it doesn't seem drastic enough as to require separation, in my opinion. Part 1 is pretty much all of the piano-heavy ballads, and part 2 is trapped-out club hits, but they are both so complementary that I don't really get why these songs weren't just mixed together, or even just left as is without the labels of parts 1 and 2. And this isn't necessarily a huge issue. In fact, considering the pretty decent to great quality of the tracks, this is kind of a minor gripe, but I still get the sense that this choice of formatting is the first issue among more that I have yet to notice. But for now, what is presented here, past the odd presentation, I think is pretty good. On my reaction video for Yukon, I had said I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of Joji's work past him being one of the most influential content creators that YouTube has ever seen. Ballads 1 and Nectar I have had many ups and downs with and mixed feelings about, but I've pretty much come away from both of those projects with more positive opinions than not. But until now, I've kind of always thought that Joji's work was kind of lacking in the finer details in a lot of ways. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of lo-fi, but on this album, Joji does find a clearer balance between the early in-tongues washed out production with the more crisp but still gentle delivery that he mostly works with on the first half of the album. The latter half of the record does have a tendency to fall back into lo-fi trap beats that I do like, but are giving me a lot of deja vu, like these cuts were supposed to be on Nectar or something. And I think that's the thing that's just been bothering me so much about this album, is how much I am enjoying it, but how little it feels like it's a step forward, and how instead it feels as if Joji is not recycling the same tricks, but is just kind of freshening up old ideas. I mean, the only track on this project that actually excites me somewhat is Yukon, because it does feel like it is trying to step forward and become something more than what this project is. So I'm just not sure what the ideal scenario for this album is, or what the best output is for Joji at this point. I do get that the nature of this style of music is that it kind of all sounds somewhat similar, and not always necessarily in a bad way, but this is like 4 albums now, and dozens of tracks that actively feel like progress has come to a near standstill. And yes, the tracks do still work for the most part. When you look at them on their own, for the sake of argument, this album in a vacuum is totally fine, great even. Glimpse of Us, while I find it to be almost hideously pretty, is actually a really heartfelt song that I think drips with a brilliant melancholy. Feeling Like the End is a short, light touch of trap dropped as a pacer that I think helps a lot on this side of the album, and is notably the only trap that appears on this side. Die For You has this fantastic instrumental that absolutely screams Brian Eno to me. I'm talking like music for installations. It is gorgeous. The vocals in comparison to the beat are fine, I guess, but really that instrumental for me is just top notch. Before the Day Is Over is really the only song where I'm not super huge on the instrumental, but comparatively, I think that this is some of the best vocal work here from Joji on this project. I'm really enjoying his firm lows, which are refreshing. Dissolve has this leading guitar that I do like, but I think meshes a little bit weirdly with these overblown auto-tuned vocals, which are kind of plainly just way too much. I do think there's a time and a place for auto-tune, but I think it's maybe used too much on this album in general, and especially so on this track. Not to dismiss auto-tune or anything, but I do think it is a crutch creatively that Joji is far too fast to lean on. Part 2 starts with Night Rider, which fundamentally shifts the tone of the album into a late night, neon lights and downers style. I'm liking a lot of this track, but I can't say that I like the quick bursts of highs that pop up in this track, like it's going to be sort of like a skirt gratata kind of a rap track, you know, like skirt, 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 that kind of stuff. It is pretty annoying, actually, especially because I really like everything else on this track but that. Blah 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 Demo does in fact sound like a demo, mostly in that it is pretty plain in comparison to a lot of these other songs, but even as just a demo, it is a pretty good track. It does make me wonder, though, if there was an attempt at actually maybe finishing this song or if they kind of just blew through it and just said, good enough. Yukon Interlude, again, I think really is the only track that makes me feel like there was at least a little bit of consideration and a little bit of a conscious effort to focus this sound for a more pop-oriented audience. I mean, I really, really wish that more of this album was on this same level of energy because he pulls this thing off just so naturally. 1AM Freestyle I do like quite a bit. As far as Joji's output sounding kind of samey, this fits the bill, but it is a better example of that sound and style, so this one gets a pass. So yeah, there's good stuff here. In fact, I don't think any of these songs are bad, which makes this whole thing even more frustrating to me. Not because I think it falls victim to hype, but because I think what has been presented could have been a lot more ambitious than what we ended up getting. I'm not saying that Joji needs to change up his style or that he needs to abandon this sound entirely, but there are so few standout moments here that I don't really see why this album was released as it is. It is good by a bare definition, isolated in a vacuum. It is totally fine. But with the context of all of the other stuff that Joji has done, this album had plenty of opportunities to take risks that it very simply didn't. And at this point, I think not taking risks, not pushing things too far, staying too far in the comfort zone is really going to be a detriment for this album, and if this continues for following albums too. With all of that being said, I like the album. I really enjoy Yukon. I do like Die For You quite a bit. 1AM Freestyle is a great closer. But yeah, I just can't help but feel that this album had every chance to have some tricks up its sleeve, but ended up being a little too face value for its own good. I'm thinking Smithereens is a solid 7. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of this album in the comments below, and if you like what I'm doing here, drop a tip in the PayPal, check out my Instagram, my Reverb, and my Depop. Links to all of those are in the description below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.